What are you doing?
Manscaped. Gentlemen, don't be like this guy who's never heard of Manscaped. That's criminal. Yes, you can get your hands on the pristine Lawnmower 4.0, the pinnacle of male grooming technology, with cutting-edge ceramic blades to reduce grooming accidents, water-resistant and with wireless charging, and is in fact the very same kit I use to service my own crown jewels. So, I can give you a Mort assurance that you will be blown away. And if you don't want it for yourself, then gift it to someone this holiday season. And to keep up the festive cheer, you get a whopping 20% off plus free shipping using discount code MORT. And as they say, your balls will thank you. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I want to start off by saying I really don't consider myself a heavy believer in the paranormal. I feel that a lot of situations can be explained by logical science. There are some things that simply cannot be explained though. There were 3 incidences in my childhood home that I cannot still explain to this day. If someone has experienced anything similar, feel free to give me insight. Let me take you back to when I was younger, perhaps 10 or 11. We lived in a very large old Victorian house, which had 5 floors, very long hallways on each floor, and old wooden flooring. There were always creepy sounds at night, and weird power outages, but that could always be attributed to the age of the house. We liked the house a lot. The first incident happened in the attic. We called it the attic, but in reality, it had a family room, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a guest room. The 3rd floor stairs have a landing that leads to the attic door, which takes you up a flight of stairs, and you come to a long hallway on your left that leads you to the family room at the end of the hall, and a large window on your right that the moonlight comes through. When you enter the family room, there's a spiral staircase that takes you to the top floor, which is just a dark, small room that we never used except for storage. One night, I was playing with my toys on the stairs of the 3rd floor, right next to the door that leads to the attic. We had a cat at the time. As I was playing, I heard scratching in the attic. Not wanting to get in trouble for her destroying a couch, as I'm the one who asked for the cat, I opened the attic door and walked up the stairs to go find her. As soon as I reached the top of the stairs and turned down the long hallway, the scratching stopped and the power to the house went out, which left me in total darkness. I put my back against the window and slid down, and started down the long hallway, terrified and waiting for the power to come on. As I slid down, I heard a very slow thump, the sound of someone walking down the spiral staircase. The sound is unmistakable because the steps are metal. The sound continued right behind the family room door. I heard each step. The steps stopped. The family room door moved slightly, and immediately I felt this rush come over me. I got so cold, and my heart started beating in such a way I felt it actually move my chest. After a few seconds, the door bolted open, and something started sprinting down the hallway at me. I couldn't see a thing, but I felt the movement, that feeling you get when something is near you. I remember that was the first time I ever felt like prey. My heart was in my throat, but I screamed as loudly as I could, and as soon as it got close to me, the rush went away, and the cold left my body. My parents ran up the stairs, and after I told them what happened, they went to the breaker box and came up and looked all around but found nothing. But the handle on the family room door was broken, and the window behind me was cracked. It is possible I cracked it when I put my back into it to slide down, but it was cracked at a height that I couldn't reach with my body at the time. The basement was the worst part of the house. It was one of those dreary, unfinished concrete floor basements. It was as large as any 1st floor of a house. I mean truly massive. When you open the door, the short stairs looked like you're going into a cellar, and when you come down the stairs, you have to walk for several steps in the dark to find the string of light and pull it. Even then, that light only illuminates the immediate area, not the rest of the basement. There are several lights like this the further you go, each one with a string to pull. To the left is the rest of the basement. It goes all the way back, and then there's a cove tucked to the left where the dogs sleep. It's out of the line of sight. Since there's a small window in the cove, it casts this bluish-black light in the morning and night from the moon. One early morning around 5 a.m. I had to go feed the dogs since my dad was out of town. I hated when it was my turn because the basement always gave me a terrible feeling. I would always call the dogs to meet me at the stairs so that I didn't have to walk down the stairs in the dark alone. I called for them, waited and called again. They didn't come and I heard no sound, so I walked down the stairs in the dark and held my hand out to find the string to pull the light. As I reached for the light, I saw movement at the end of the basement near the cove, and my breath caught in my chest. I pulled the light fast, and the bulb popped with a quick burst of light. In that moment I saw a man standing at the end of the basement. He didn't disappear like in the movies though, and I wish he had. In the dark he was a sliver of moonlight from the cove window. I can still see him standing there with his back to me. He didn't move at all, and his head was cocked to the left in such an unnatural way, at an angle where his neck had to have been broken. He was probably 40 feet away from me. As I stood there trying to force a scream through my throat that felt like it was locked up, I couldn't look away. And in those few seconds I stared, I saw it. It was less of a man and more of a thing. It had white translucent skin and looked gangly. I literally and honestly pissed myself standing up. I lost all control. I think the pee snapped out of me because I felt the warmth of my leg, and I started backing away. And as I backed away, it sprinted to the left towards the cove where the dogs were, and I ran up those stairs, and I chipped my tooth falling into the stairs, still chipped to this day, and I slammed the door shut and locked the latch. I called my mum down, and we called the dogs from the top of the stairs. No response. We went down there, and both dogs were huddled together in the corner of the cove. It took them 5 minutes to leave the corner and come up. We had to pull them apart and walk them with us holding their collars. The last one is short and simple, and probably the worst experience I had in that house. In that same basement, there's a furnace room to the left of the stairs about 15 feet away from the stairs. It's dark and cramped, and has all kinds of luggage and extra supplies in it. The day before Thanksgiving, we were preparing for family to arrive. My mother sent me to get the Thanksgiving table decor, or whatever it's called, and as I walked down the stairs I saw the furnace room door was cracked. I stopped dead in my tracks. That door was never left open. We were always told to close it so that the dogs don't go in there. Really, my parents made a huge deal out of it, and I stayed on the stairs and stared at the door. I felt the hair on my neck raise, and my fists clench out of instinct. As I stare in the crack of the door, I see half a smile in one eye. The smile was so close to being human, but so far at the same time. I can't explain it. It was as though something had been observing humans to mimic them, but just couldn't get the face right. As I ran up the stairs, I heard the creak of the furnace door opening further, slammed, and locked the door. And that was the last time I ever went into the basement. From that point on, my parents never made me go back down there and delegated my basement chores to my siblings, even though I know that they don't believe me. It was a nice gesture, and I was thankful for it. Since we moved, I have never experienced anything abnormal in our house. I'm 26 now, and have never had any issues with the paranormal since then. I like to rationalize by telling myself it was fear and my brain playing tricks on me. But part of me deep down knows that it wasn't. From the time I was born until I was around 6 years old, my family and I lived in a townhome close to my city's community college. It wasn't particularly old, and as far as my parents knew, the house had no dark past to speak of. There was a good chance the house was built on old farmland, and there was certainly a Native American presence in the area long ago. But the house itself was totally normal. My parents moved into the house in 2001 and hadn't had anything out of the ordinary occur until I was born, sometime around late 2004 to early 2005. This is the first odd experience my family had in the house, as told to me by my mum. My mum was very close friends with her supervisor, Christy. Christy was over at our house quite often, since my mum often consulted her for help with work, and she would usually bring her son over to play with me. On this particular day, it was just her. My mum and Christy were down in the kitchen talking at the table. My dad was upstairs in one of the bedrooms changing my diaper. My mum goes up to use the bathroom, which was just across the hall from the kitchen by the front door, and Christy stays at the table. As my mum is in the bathroom, out of nowhere she hears a woman's voice she doesn't recognize saying something along the lines of, "Hello, handsome." My mum, thinking a neighbor has come over to say hello, thinks nothing of it, and when she comes out of the bathroom she asks Christy if anyone's come over. Christy looks at my mum baffled and tells her that no one has entered the house and that she hadn't heard a woman's voice. As Christy and my mum look around the house puzzled, my dad comes downstairs holding me and asks, "Who stopped by to say hello?" He'd heard the same woman's voice. No one could figure out where the voice had come from or how both my mum and dad, on 2 separate floors at the time, had both heard the same voice. Christy told my mum she got a weird feeling in the house, but my parents just wrote it off and figured it was just a strange coincidence. But this proved to only be the beginning. It was around this time that my mum began capturing these strange balls of light in every picture she took around the house. Now my mum acknowledges herself that capturing a picture or two containing an orb is nothing out of the ordinary, considering orbs can be caused by dust or tricks of the light. But this was different. These orbs were appearing in every picture she would take. My mum cut the camera strap off her camera, tried using disposable Kodak cameras instead of our digital one, and got the house deep cleaned several times, took pictures in different parts of the house to avoid light contamination, and even bought an entirely new digital camera. But alas, the orbs still appeared in every single photo. There are hundreds of photos sitting in albums in our living room with these massive orbs in them. These orbs will show up later in the story. My mum hosted a group of mothers for young babies at our house, and Christy also happened to be a part of this group. One day the group was over at the house and seated in a circle in our living room, when suddenly Christy looked up towards our couch and screamed, pointing towards it. She looked at my mum in a panic and shouts, "There's a man standing behind your couch!" The rest of the group looked over to see no one. It wouldn't have been possible for there to be someone behind the couch anyway. The couch was pushed up against the wall. Christy grabbed her son and ran out of the house. And although she and my mum remained friends, they haven't seen each other in years, but they're still friends on Facebook, Christy refused to enter the house ever again. Christy had seen the pictures containing the orbs, since they were actually pictures of me and her son together that showed the orbs floating around us. But seeing this man behind the couch was the last straw. She stuck to her word and never returned to the house for the remainder of our time there. It was around this time that my parents began to feel off in the house, especially when spending time in the basement and in my bedroom. My mum would try as hard as she could to avoid spending too much time in the basement, and both of my parents have told me that they feel like they were being watched as they tucked me into bed some nights. And then one day, the activity presented itself while my dad was at work. For a little backstory, I'm not sure if anyone else has experienced this as a child, but I was absolutely obsessed with these classical music CDs called Baby Einstein. They had these weird puppet creatures that represented different artists and composers, and all of the CDs were narrated by the same woman, whose name escapes me now. Anyway, I was in the living room asleep while my mum was in the kitchen cooking. She was playing one of the Baby Einstein CDs over some speakers that we had, so that I wouldn't wake up and bother her as she cooked. As she was cooking, she starts hearing what sounds like a woman talking over the music. My mum could tell it wasn't the narrator, since this woman sounded a lot younger and was talking during one of the pieces, and the narrator only came on between songs. At first, my mum thought she could have just been overhearing someone talking outside, and although my mum couldn't make out exactly what the woman was saying, she described it to me as if hearing the woman having a conversation. She sounded happy, and my mum could hear the tone of her voice changing as she talked. When my mum looked out the blinds of the kitchen window, she saw no one. Thinking maybe it was coming from elsewhere, she walked out onto the deck looking out into the forest behind my house. Again, there was no one. At this point, the woman had stopped talking, and my mum was beginning to be convinced that she was experiencing something paranormal. After this, the activity around the house came to a head. There was one night my aunt was over with my mum, helping her around the house while my dad was at work. Another quick bit of backstory. My room was very dark, and it was sometimes very hard to hear what was going on up there from downstairs. For this reason, my parents bought a baby monitor to stick in my room, so they would know if I was crying or wasn't sleeping well. This was long before the days of video monitors, so all this monitor had was a cheap microphone and some red lights that showed how loud the noise was. Also in my room, sitting directly across from the crib, was an old rocking chair that my mum had inherited from her grandma. My aunt and my mum had just put me to sleep, and were sitting downstairs when they started hearing a noise over the baby monitor. At first they couldn't quite make it out, but very quickly realized what they were hearing. It was the sound of the rocking chair, creaking back and forth as if someone was sitting on it. The only person that should have been upstairs at the time was myself, but I was fast asleep. My aunt and mum were downstairs, and my dad was still at work. The two stood up from their chairs in a panic, but as soon as they stood, the creaking noise suddenly stopped. They walked upstairs and into my room and found nothing out of the ordinary. I was still fast asleep, and the rocking chair looked as though it had never been disturbed. They walked back downstairs, and as soon as they sat back down, the creaking started again. This cycle of creaking over the baby monitor, walking upstairs to find everything undisturbed and then sitting back down and hearing the creak starting again, continued for an hour, and it reached a point where my aunt was convinced we should leave the house and stay in a hotel for the night. Not too long after, my dad came home, and the creaking stopped completely. At this point, my mum was convinced her and my dad's feeling of discomfort surrounding my bedroom were justified, and began looking for ways to solve the problem. Although my dad remained skeptical, my mum was convinced that what was going on in the house was indeed paranormal, and began trying to find ways to reach out to whatever was inhabiting the house with us. At this point, my mum had accumulated hundreds of pictures containing orbs, and wanted to see if she could capture something more compelling in a photo. One day she decided to take the camera and point it to a random spot in the house. Before snapping the picture, she said out loud, "Can you give me some sort of sign that you're here?" She snapped at the photo, and as she looked down at the screen, she was shocked. Several separate balls of light appear in the center of the screen up against a wall, but they appeared in a straight horizontal line. She was ecstatic that not only did she capture something more compelling than an orb, but also managed to capture some sort of intelligence from what she was now convinced was a spirit living in our home. She tried asking for more signs, but in the absence of anything else, she began combing through the hundreds of pictures she'd already taken, looking for anything else that could show these were more than just a trick of the eye, or dust particles floating through the air. After a good amount of time searching, she found what she was looking for: a picture of me and Christy's son featuring an orb. But this orb was different. Inside the orb was an outline of what appeared to be a sort of face. She immediately began searching around the internet for paranormal investigators and contacted a team in the area to see if they would be willing to come and check out the house. The investigators asked her to tell them about the experiences we'd been having in the house, and although they were a little apprehensive, they finally agreed to check things out. Before coming out to investigate, the investigators told her that normally they would not be willing to come and check out a house if all the residents had to show for the ghost were pictures of orbs and personal testimony, but they were convinced by both the sheer amount of pictures that my mum had and the two very bizarre photos, one featuring the line of orbs and the other featuring the orb with a face. The investigators did come over, albeit slightly skeptical, but immediately began experiencing strange activity. Almost as soon as the investigators walked upstairs into my room, all of their camera batteries died simultaneously. This actually freaked them out, with one of them looking at my dad and saying something like, "Your house is weird, man." These were all new batteries, and they died in 5 minutes. The same thing happened down in the basement, with batteries dying left and right, affecting all sorts of equipment. Microphones and digital recorders picked up strange, staticky feedback, and their electromagnetic field readers picked up odd spikes both in my bedroom and in the basement. My parents' suspicions about the house had been confirmed by professionals, and the investigators were convinced there was something off about the house. After reviewing the evidence and doing some deliberating, the investigators told my parents that they wanted to return to the house a second time, this time with more equipment, since they were convinced there was more evidence to be captured. My parents eagerly set up the follow-up and waited. Now this is where the story becomes a little muddy. I do 100% believe my mum, and the fact that my dad, a skeptic, backs her up on a lot of these stories makes it extra compelling to me. But this last part of the story has always left a bad taste in my mouth. My mum has always been a very spiritual person, always believed in angels, certain stones carrying supernatural powers and the like. She's a therapist and a hypnotist, so I get it. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is to maybe take this final portion of the story with a grain of salt. Yes, it's odd, but I don't want to make assumptions about what was going on, and neither should you. I wouldn't be telling this story if I wasn't convinced it was real. But this final portion has always seemed a little odd. So my mum had set up a consultation with a woman claiming to be a psychic medium, well before the paranormal investigators came over to visit the house. The appointment was only a week or so before the investigators were scheduled for their follow-up. Anyway, during the appointment, the woman asked my mum about the strange experiences we'd been having in the house, and the medium told my mum that she'd picked up on the energy of a man in the house. She said he was lonely, and that he'd latched onto my family since he'd never had one of his own. Obviously that didn't explain the woman's voice we heard in the house, but whatever. Like I said, this whole thing seems a little odd to me. The woman asked my mum if she wanted her to either cleanse the house or leave it be. Knowing the investigators were returning soon, my mum told the woman not to do anything to the house. She wanted to see what could be captured with more advanced equipment. The medium told her she wouldn't, but when my mum returned home afterwards, she noticed the entire house felt different. It felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off the house's atmosphere. She began to suspect that the medium had cleansed the house anyway. Not sure how this is possible, considering the medium never actually visited the house. Maybe someone in the comments can explain how this works. Anyway, and her suspicions were only confirmed when the investigators returned for the second time and captured absolutely nothing. No bizarre EMF readings, no cold spots, no electrical malfunctions, not a thing. After the investigators' return, that was it for the specific flurry of activity. There was a second time we had some weird experiences in the house, which I was actually old enough to remember. But in any case, I don't think they're worth mentioning. In conclusion, I'll say I totally believe the things that my parents told me about the house, partly because there were other witnesses to it, and partly because I witnessed some of the stuff myself years later, and partially because my dad can't explain what was going on, and he was and still is a total skeptic. For him to admit Not only that he couldn't explain some of the experiences, but also that it genuinely creeped him out sometimes, has me really convinced that there was something very strange going on in that house. I know, the whole thing with the psychic medium is odd, but my mum would have no reason to lie about it. She got no attention from local newspaper or TV stations in regard to the activity. The paranormal investigators weren't paying to come over to the house, and my mum has always been apprehensive about sharing the story with others. In fact, this is my first time sharing it. I'm not trying to force anyone to believe it, I'm just saying it how it is. My girlfriend lives with her grandparents. Her great-grandmother used to live there too, until she passed away in the very room that is now my girlfriend's room. In her will, she left many of her antique items such as her drawers and cabinets. They were very close. A strange thing to mention here is that before she passed away, she told her son, my girlfriend's granddad, who also lives there, that when his time comes, she will take him. In French, it's c'est moi qui viendra te chercher. We live in Quebec. Anyway, for the sake of me telling the story, let's call him Roger. Roger's health had been declining quickly over the past 2 years. As a non-stop smoker who eats overly salty foods and refuses to go to the hospital even for a checkup, you can understand our slight concern. When I first noticed unusual activity in that house, it was minor things. Doors that were left open when they were closed, kitchen drawers that would randomly be opened, the TV would randomly turn on and off, etc. However, as Roger's health deteriorates, the activity in the home is becoming seriously unsettling. For example, one night, her grandparents were going to some camp thing with their friends, so it was just her and I. Her room is in the basement, which is under the living room upstairs. When at about 1 a.m., all we hear and feel is strong footsteps walking around the living room. First of all, the idea of ghosts or anything like that do not cross our mind at the moment, and we were watching Lucifer on TV, so weren't sleeping. And an idea crossed our mind. The only thing you can think of, or at least that we thought, was that there was an intruder in the house. I may be a man and physically fit, but my heart fell to my stomach. I told her to get on the phone and dial 911 while I peeked outside the room and yelled out if someone was there and what they wanted. But I heard nothing, and there was no answer. So then I thought, well, we didn't even hear the footsteps recede or leaving the house. Are they literally just standing there? With the police on the phone, we make our trip up. With me in the front, we get to the living room and nothing. No person, no boot marks, no sign of entering from either of the doors, the back door, or any window. Everything remained locked. The police actually ended up coming anyway to make sure. They went around the house, checked the windows, but also saw that there were no signs that anyone could have gone in. We thanked them and they left. My girlfriend is convinced that these experiences have been her great-grandmother, somehow still wandering the house. Because of this, she has no fear at all, and communicates with her using pendants and witchcraft things, which I don't believe in at all, but I thought were worth mentioning. Whatever the case is, those footsteps were not the footsteps of some frail old woman. They were heavy and menacing. Is she in the wrong? Should she stop communicating with something just because she believes it to be her great-grandmother? Or should I just never step foot into that house again? I personally am feeling more of the latter option. In the fall of 2016, I moved into half of a really old house that was built in the 1880s, a stone's throw away from the original campus of Indiana University, which is now a park filled with homeless people and drug addicts. The owners basically turned it into a weird duplex. My friend had lived in it right before I moved in and claimed that it was haunted. But I really didn't believe him, because he was a bit of an odd guy. The layout of the house was weird. You walked into the door and were in a living room type of space, and then you kept walking, and there was a doorway to a bedroom. Past that, the kitchen. No doors, The only door inside the apartment was to the bathroom and the one that led to the shared basement. So my first night there was uneventful. I was a little uncomfortable because I hadn't lived by myself in a long time and was just feeling lonely and on edge. I stayed up late and then eventually fell asleep, but I woke up again at around 3 in the morning. Cliché, I know. What woke me up was what sounded like a group of drummers drumming on every flat surface of the living room. It went on for a while, and I was completely terrified. It was just a cacophony of sounds. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I finally gathered up the balls to get up and check on it. As soon as I passed the threshold to the living room, it just stopped. Nothing happened the rest of the night, but I didn't get much sleep. A few days later, my friend was visiting, and he was about to leave. We were standing by the front door next to my bookshelf, and I told him how I was having trouble sleeping, and the story from the night before. As I was saying this, a book threw itself off the bookshelf and onto the floor 3 feet away. It had to fly past the dresser, the shelf it was perched, and landed between the two of us. He just gave me a creeped out look and said he had to go. I don't blame him. Eventually I asked the guy in the other half what was up, as he had lived there for 8 years. He told me that no one stayed there longer than a year, and they all reported the same stuff. For whatever reason, he said nothing ever happened on his side. Doesn't make sense, but there it is. On top of that, you would hear stuff shuffling around a lot in the room you were in. The light to the shared basement would randomly come on at night, even when the neighbor was traveling. Sometimes I would feel something get into my bed, like a cat, and nothing was ever there. Even after I ended up with a pair of cats, I had a lot, and I mean a lot, of nightmares while there. That was the bulk of it. But I have 2 stories that were more notable, and here they are. The first one was when I was woken up sometime in the middle of the night to a loud crashing sound. So in the living room there was an old electric organ with about 6 inches of clearance from the wall. I stashed a folding chair like you would buy in IKEA in between the organ and the wall. The crashing sound was the folding chair being unfolded and slammed into the middle of the room. By this point I already had the cats, and they were just sitting there staring at me when I came into the room. The second, I will admit, may have a conventional explanation, but I find it so much more scary if it were paranormal. I'll let you decide. At some point I reconnected with an old friend who'd moved home from California when his father got cancer. He ended up living with me, which was not ideal because, as I said earlier, there were no doors, no privacy. But we became close friends. Being poor, we made it work. So he ended up dating this girl who lived about 3 blocks down the road and would often leave and sleep over there. I got him a job where I worked 9 to 5, and we would alternate driving to work in the morning. Anyway, one night he's over at his girl's house, spending the night, and I went to bed. Sometime in the night he came back home, and he went to use the bathroom, which was in my room. Remember, no doors? So he had to walk past my bed to use the toilet. I wake up. He's there taking a leak, and I can see the light on under the door. When he's done and turns off the light, he lays down to sleep on the couch. It's winter, and the cats had been escaping and coming back late at night, and one of them had been outside earlier, so I wonder if he had come in with my roommate, and if not, if he would have seen him coming home and waiting at the door. So I decided to get up and check. I go to the door, open it, but there's no Luke. I close the door, and he is sitting right there by my feet with his sister. Okay, I look at the couch. The roomie's already fast asleep as usual. All is good and I go back to sleep. In the morning I wake up and my roomie's gone. I go about my routine and step out to smoke a cigarette while my car warms up. As it gets closer to 9, I begin to debate leaving him to drive himself when I see him coming sprinting down the sidewalk. We get in the car and start for work. I ask him what time he left in the morning to go back to his girlfriend's house. He said he was there all night. I just about crapped my pants. I know for a fact the door was locked because the door had some ancient lock design that locked automatically every time you used it. And I also know for a fact that my cat was outside, and in the morning he was back inside. I really don't know what to make of it, but it was really unsettling. And just for fun, a small third story. I said earlier my house was not far from a park that junkies and the homeless frequented. In the summer of 2017 it was late, and I heard a bunch of noises on my porch, so I went to investigate. There were two dudes huddled right by my steps with a flashlight, and I asked them what they were doing. They replied using English words, but not something I would describe as a language, and they started walking towards that park, through my yard, and the whole time one of them was just calling back to me, "Hey, it's the dark. Sorry." As a child at the age of 4, my family moved into a newly constructed house in the middle of Tennessee, and this is where my first contact with entities happened. One of the first nights I was there, I will always remember walking into my parents' walk-in closet. As I walked in, I felt a cool and refreshing wind blow over me, and saw an entity that looked like a man made of TV static standing at the doorway to the attic. I felt completely at peace and happy. However, I ended up passing out in the closet and pissing all over my mum's shoes. Later on, as I grew to be about 14, I saw a burnt face and manacled hands floating around my room by the door. I remember thinking that the thing hated me and everything about me, and the intensity of its malevolence made me pass out. The next day, I would walk through the area where the entity appeared and occasionally see it from the corner of my eye. I would routinely see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, of men in big hats and cats and dogs. One day I saw these shadows, and all of a sudden my sister screamed bloody murder. I ran into their room and saw movement out of my peripherals fleeing. My sister said that a big cat, not our cat, jumped on her and pinned her down. Both my sisters saw it. One day when I was babysitting my sisters, the brand new oven that we had suddenly locked and caught fire within, and it wasn't responding to button inputs or anything. The fire alarm went off and I called my dad to come home, and he turned off the gas under the oven. There was no explanation for the oven incident whatsoever. My friend, who was local, told me that the site of our house had 3 older houses before that had all burnt down in that one spot. Strange occurrences continued at the house, doors opening and shutting. My sister told me recently that after I'd left for the military, she saw a face out the window while she was reading on her phone. Lightning flash and the silhouette of a ladder falling. Then a mangled face pressed onto the screen of the window. The basement where I moved to as a 16-year-old was also a weird environment. I once dreamed that the walls were closing in and ran upstairs in my dreams to wake up on the couch upstairs. My best friend and I, under no influence of drugs, also simultaneously hallucinated that we were at a McDonald's. The basement seems to always amplify hysteria and cause people to act out of character. At a party for high school students we threw, a normally mild-mannered kid freaked out for no apparent reason, punched a pregnant classmate, and also I had a scary dream about my grandpa being a giant in my basement laughing at me. The next day, I found out he had died that night. I dreaded visiting my parents at this point because of the house. While they were very kind and loving when I was younger, by my teens they had become abusive narcissists and boundary-crossing maniacs, and quite frankly I was worried about them both. My father, a formerly devout Christian, had been visiting spirit mediums, which I found out through a reliable source. They also refused to admit our house is haunted. And that's simply the house. I also had a crazy Ouija board experience in high school. Me and a group of friends went to the oldest building at school and began playing. I was skeptical about the whole process, and although a few crazy things happened, the thing that really blew my mind is as the session was coming to a close, it spells out, "Brandon says hi from hell." As soon as it spelled that out, my friend whipped her hand off the planchette and started crying. Apparently, That was the name of her dead brother. Bear in mind, no one, not a soul, had even known about Brandon's existence before this session. We got to say goodbye, and that was the end of it. After that, strange events started happening to all of us. With everything that I'd seen in my house, and now everything that was about to come, I definitely feel like I was cursed somehow. I even went to a friend's dad's girlfriend's who used incense and tried to bless us, but she says that the evil she sensed was intense. Let me tell you, the next 3 years I was arrested 3 times, went to jail twice, was suspended from high school, kicked out of college, almost died in a car accident, and was forced to join the Navy to avoid criminal charges. And although the intensity in my life has died down a lot since then, I often feel followed and watched, and see dead cats out of the corner of my eyes too. I wonder, for real, if I am cursed. My sister and I were just talking on the phone about some strange things that had happened to us all throughout our time in our childhood home. I mentioned that I thought our home was haunted because our mother had taken a rock from Auschwitz and brought it back home. My working theory is that the rock itself carries energy, or memory, or spirits that are imprinted into the stone because of the horrific trauma within the walls of the concentration camp. My sister and I were sharing stories and experiences that we had, which correlated with the time that the rock had been in our family home, as well as correlated to the movement of the rock from room to room. I am very aware that what my mum did was disrespectful and disturbed some energies. It's just taking a long time to put 2 and 2 together about this object. Anyway, just for reference, we would experience in our house physical pain unrelated to any obvious injury, mental health struggles, and thoughts of ending our own life, unexplainable and unintelligible whispers, shouts, loud bangs, and the like with no discernible cause. Strange sounds coming from underneath the floor in my bedroom, odd lights and anomalies in my sister's bedroom, and just an atmosphere of constant unease and anxiety. Any ideas would be greatly appreciated. We don't know what to go about this, but we definitely want to talk to our mum about having something done to cleanse the house, and doing something with the rock that honors the spirits of the innocent dead, while banishing any lingering spirits connected to it. Please, all suggestions would be appreciated. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's video, and you know what? I really hope that you enjoyed the ad at the start of the video. It took a long time to plan and then make, and I really tried my best. I hope you guys liked it. I just tried to be creative with these things. I don't know if you remember the last Manscaped ad I made. It was Witch's video and I tried to make it all funny. Anyway, that aside, I do have a few announcements which I will be repeating in Thursday's video in the morning. You're thinking, oh what, Thursday? What's this about? So I know I used to post every day, and then I said I can't do this anymore. I am literally burning, literally burning out. So I said Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But the problem is that when I release on Friday and then I release again on Saturday, it kind of cannibalizes Friday's video, you know, judging by the analytics. So what I thought would probably be best is to post on Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday. That way, you know, the videos can be out for a good amount of time and everyone can enjoy them before the new video comes out. I just thought that made most sense. So yes, that is what I'm going to do. And remember that I have started a new channel called Mr. Knox, where I tell more horror stories, shorter and with visuals, and they're about 10 minutes long each video. I've got some really cool and interesting stuff planned for that channel. I don't want to give away too much, but it is involving footage and real things caught on camera, sort of like the stuff I would have loved to have seen in these stories. So if you like that, I would really appreciate it if you could check out the channel, watch the videos, tell me what you think of them. The comments are few and far between, but I would really like to hear what you think on the channel itself. That would really mean a lot to me, guys. Thank you. But I'm going to end the video here just by extending a huge thank you, as always, to my lovely members and patrons, and coffee supporters who really do help me keep making this content. It really does mean a lot, so thank you all. I think I'm going to wrap things up here though. Thank you to each and every one of you that made it to the end. Watching these videos means the world to me. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And I hope you all have a really lovely festive season, or December, depending on whether you celebrate it or not. And I'll see you on Thursday. And if you want to watch more Mr. Nook's videos, you can, check out the link that I will leave in the top of the description. Oh, underneath the top of the description. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.